Welcome back to the Torque Test channel. This is our 3/4 inch Snap-on MG 1250 that we bought for, well, it must be called the 1250 because it's $1,250. Its toupee thing that it came with, got to be around here somewhere. And this is Harbor Freight's latest impact wrench, their new 3/4 inch Earthquake that we bought for $250. So let's compare them and versus some of the top 3/4 inch cordless impacts people might be buying out there these days, with some potential advantages over those as well. Not because Snap-on versus Harbor Freight is always the obvious best choice of comparison, but well, the exact $1,000 price gap between these is begging the question. And I mean, we have the Snap-on sitting around here, at least until we give both of these away randomly to owners of our rank charts in the next 2 weeks, which we tend to do from time to time, see description. But yes, this is the new EQ34 GMXT. It's the most powerful pistol impact wrench Harbor Freight has ever offered. It's rated 1,800 foot-pounds bolt breakaway and, well, 11 to 1,300 foot-pounds max torque or tightening. They now list these as 10-second and 30-second test runs these days. There's no accepted 30-second long industry standard test, and most tools, including their own, get hung up and stick at points trying to get there anyways. But it is a nice development to see some transparency there. The Snap-on's rated 1,350 foot-pounds breakaway and 1,250 max torque. So on the older school, harder to flub spec, the 1250, it is much closer or similar to the Harbor Freight. And yes, these are both 3/4 inch drive air impacts, good old-fashioned ugga-dugga machines, which means they're meant for actual work, from large-ish to very large fasteners and the stuckest of stuck stuff. This means, unlike most cordless 3/4 inch, which just swap in a different drive anvil to put out a new tool, these are ground up, larger, heavier format style of impact wrenches. The Snap-on measures 8.14 inches long, which would be commonplace for cordless 1/2 inch high torques, but is longer than your typical upper 6-inch 1/2 inch air impact. And the Harbor Freight measures longer at around 8.5 inches, and also advertises being 25% lighter. I'm sure that means compared to their own past models, but this Snap-on is sort of a yardstick for many of these things, been around for a while. The Snap-on weighs 8.1 pounds, 8 pounds 2 ounces, and the Earthquake is going to come in at 7 pounds 15 ounces, almost 8 pounds. So these two tools are very comparable so far. Size, weight, max torque spec, everything save for warranty, and that the Snap-on has one and you'd need to purchase one for their Earthquake, and the MG is made in the US and Harbor Freight in Taiwan. So let's strap these onto the dyno. It feels good to be getting back to our ugga-dugga roots. A throttle check on these tools just feels right. No electric whirring like on a cordless tool, like a batch of laundry. The DeWALT DCF964 probably, well, no, it is the top 3/4 inch cordless on the market. Here it's hitting 673 foot-pounds in this industry standard 5-second working torque test, while the 3/4 inch Milwaukee, which has still somehow not been updated since this one came out, hits 587, which is an example of just their Gen 2 high torque with a different anvil. The DeWALT was always made like a new class of 3/4 inch gun. It's just also available in 1/2 inch, that sort of deal. This is how the Snap-on MG 1250 does, freshly oiled and 90 PSI working pressure, which means under full throttle it never dips below 90 PSI. Let's see what it looks like. "739 foot-pounds, the highest working torque test of any pistol, like non-two-handed 1-inch drive stuff on the channel to date. It's worth mentioning we're like solving the air supply question here. This is a 3/4 inch air hose and only 25 feet long at that, coming off a 1-inch diameter pipe stub length coming from that compressor. We fumbled with our own air supply for years in attempts to getting manufacturers' minimum air pressure in the gun while working before just buying a 120-gallon tank in large line Chicago air fittings. I mean, this is how that compares to a 3/8 airline, so that's worth understanding going into these. We had to do a lot to make sure we can replicate how brands are supplying these tools when recording these numbers. And up next, we're going to have the Harbor Freight Earthquake 3/4 inch. Here's how it does. $767. So the new record in this one-hand wieldable class of impacts. Very cool, and for less coin. So far, that is encouraging stuff. And so far, up on cordless options, which I would have always assumed these 3/4 inch air guns always seem to just really pack a wallop. But the M18 is, of course, very much due a refresh, and the DeWALT is, well, still yet to unveil its party trick, which happens in reverse. So let's head over there. This is max torque, a 10-second test done in reverse. Here's the snap-on once again. So yeah, the DeWALT sort of took off into the stratosphere there. 793 from the snap-on, and a couple of things going on here. One, the snap-on oddly not making much more than its 5-second forward test here in reverse. In a longer test, that's curious. And the DeWALT, well, at 5 seconds in, it hits VTEC and does VTEC-like things. So let's see how the Harbor Freight likes things. Here it is. 775. The Earthquake has a very similar performance profile to the snap-on on the curve, where it makes power and how soon, and the odd difference between forward and reverse so far that we're seeing, not moving the needle all that much to compare to that shorter test so far. One way to juice these things up, though, is pressure. Our 15-second best case scenario test for Astro Tools is performed at 150 psi static pressure. Like if your shop runs 150, the gun just causes that to drop to whatever it drops to, but a good increase in pressure in most cases. And these large air motors do have that area for the pounds per square inch to push against and really push things up. Let's see it. $1,016, it did it, crested into the quadruple digits. It does follow the curve of the DeWALT closely until that yellow tool hits its 5-second VTEC trigger point, and then it's sort of a different story. 1,000 though is sort of the marker for what we consider good, powerful 3/4 inch modern impact wrenches on this channel, though that's been mainly informed by cordless guns, so we'll have to see if that's true across power tool types, in part by testing more tools like this Harbor Freight new guy. Here he is at 150 psi static line pressure, lightly oiled as usual. $1,046, whereas before the Harbor Freight was trailing just behind the snap-on past the 10-second mark. We see it, at least in this high pressure mode, the Harbor Freight starts to pull ahead. Pretty good stuff, but also not earth-shattering for an earthquake that you might be hoping for. And this is about when, upon looking at all this data, we decided to measure RPM on these tools. For example, the snap-on is rated 6,400 RPM, which is a lot for this much chunk of a tool, and it makes 6,400 RPM in reverse in high. In forward, we get 63 to 6,600, 7,300, goes between those, and we see a similar thing with the Harbor Freight as well, all with the same inlet pressure and volume on tap, and that will usually mean one thing, which we'll have to confirm with the teardown. The snap-on has Loctite on the housing screws, a lot of it, to the point that an impact driver won't tackle some of them. Gonna need a 3/8 impact wrench here. And the air tool assembly, hiding itself in the hammer up front, are all pressed in real tight. A mallet and an arbor press wouldn't free this. Only a large ball peen hammer was starting to budget free, but we're gonna be giving this away, so would rather leave it in a condition that we know it tests well. And the Harbor Freight is all a bit more loosey-goosey to open up. The case screws have nothing on them, 0 thread locker, just bone dry, and can remove these with mode 1 of the impact driver. The forward reverse sliding bar, the caps on the end of it, just needs some double-ended action to remove, and then this whole assembly will come out the front, which is also fairly dry, this impact assembly. Before putting this into a professional setting, I definitely grease this with a bit more moly grease if you're going to clean it out, or grease that matches what they use if you're going to mix it. And luckily they make that easy enough to do, especially with these screws. So that's what we're going to do here with this blue Loctite and grease when reassembling this for the next guy. The hammer assembly inside this thing is a twin hammer. Both of these tools use a twin hammer, and it's about 2 3/4 pounds, in case you're curious, about 3/4 of a pound, almost a full pound heavier than your typical 1/2-inch drive high power air tool, which is a ton for something like this. But what we're interested in here is this, the air motor, the air rotor and cylinder. Surprisingly, 6 fins in here. Thought there might be 7 since it's a more later design tool, but they seem to be very much targeting the MG1250's performance, and that one uses a 6 count in its motor as well. So this is what we're going to be looking at, the air port, sort of like a rotary engine, in this case clocked away from 12 o'clock, which is not strange, but it is usually mirrored to the other side. Basically, consider this area difference, the amount of runway the air after entering has to push against the flung out rotor fins and speed up that rotor before exhausting all that pressure. It's not that simple based on the port types and where they're located, but it is very deliberate, as this is not just an old school cylinder clocking when you're installing it. These are machined eccentric here on purpose from center. All this is to say, we ain't finished. There's a reason why these did so well in working torque. It's baked into their design in forward. Normally we give cordless tools a 15-second shot at reverse and forward because they often do a smidge better in forward. Sometimes air tools almost never. In fact, snap-on tools almost always favor reverse by a lot. These, for whatever reason, were made differently, so let's see it. Same 150 PSI static, but in forward now. $1,197. Now we're talking, and holding a curve gain over the DeWALT the entire run, even including its VTEC spike. And that curve is from the DeWALT's forward run, in fact. This was higher than expected. Usually do not try to push the dyno this far on this bolt setup. Now that we have this data, we want something to compare it to. Here's the earthquake, given its all. $1,253. That's near what a 1-inch M18D handle made before they came out with forged battery packs. That's a lot of sauce. The fact that you can get this much torque from something pistol shaped, possible to use one-handed because air twin hammer mechanisms don't lend themselves to something too rowdy, all for 250 bucks. And don't need a battery and charger to add on to that. Assuming you have an air system, of course, already, that's not bad at all. For me, someone who's used 3/4-inch cordless a lot, we take a lot of our test bolts off with them around here. This is a bigger advantage than it might appear to you. You see cordless impacts on the upper end of things when up against something very stuck. That's like 1,000 plus worth of stuck. You can get stuck yourself on that socket, and you get what we call socket weld, a situation where the socket sticks and the impact just gets into a rhythm of not doing much on that socket. And this happens more often with cordless and DeWALT, especially in particular. And you can also experience a similar feedback loop of the gun vibrating, but never really like gaining any momentum and getting a good purchase on the fastener. And this isn't socket stick. Like here you can see the socket is clearly moving free, but the gun just gets a bad case of the shakes and just doesn't seem to make any progress. In these cases, a lower power or different gun in general can avoid this weird effect, but then oftentimes you don't have enough sauce. Even when your original cordless gun would normally have enough torque, like on paper, to do the job, it just gets stuck in this loop. So having a backup plan in the form of air, which can often, or is sometimes more powerful on this end of things, they simply, in my experience, from hitting less often just with bigger bangs, don't run into this issue often. But between these two, what do you think? Well, let's head over to our leaderboard, then we'll let you know our thoughts. Here's our 3/4 inch ranking, though we'll also place this on our large drive size ranking that includes 1 inch and custom builds if you want to check that out as a benefit of owning these rankings, in addition to giving these two tools away in the next 2 weeks. Their test runs are turned into points in the form of 74, 79, and 120. And then 77, 78, and 125. One's shorter than the other, and one made a bit more torque than the other. As a function of their length, that performance ends up being almost exactly equal, 147.8 and 147.4. This is also a record here. Air tools do that often with power to size, at least the part you're holding on to. You're not including the compressor in that, of course. They are also more often telling you things straight up with air tools. 1,250 foot-pounds max torque, we get 96% of that today, and Harbor Freight says between 1,100 and 1,300 for this, which, yep, it's going to get full marks here. You'll love to see it. And this is where things are going to diverge a bit, as you might imagine. $1,250 versus $250, that works out to 9.6 and a full 50.3 points, which makes for 526.4 and 577.7, or a new first place, with the Snap-on not doing too poorly either. In case you're curious, this still did have a 10-point advantage even before factoring its price. But if you want to see everything strictly by performance, this is our average power ranking, just an average of every data point along their best run, pure power everywhere. The DeWALT, when not using its kitted power stack, but instead their best battery, the Power Pack, is quite close, with these two on top in 3/4 inch drive with 959 and 951. It seems clear to me Harbor Freight had their sights on the MG 1250, even machining it in a way to replicate how it prefers Ford, which seems strange to me, but maybe there are diesel and heavy equipment tasks that call for that more often due to fastener size than 1/2 inchers we're used to using. And in the making of this video, we can now see it is exactly who they are comparing this to, as well as they list it on the sell page now, the MG 1250. Do you save $1,000? Well, that's only if your dealer is charging you retail and they're not accounting for you buying the warranty, in Harbor Freight's case here. But just brass tacks, yeah, you'd have to admit that these two compare very closely, with the more later design Earthquake having performance edge in most cases. On top of that, there's two things the Harbor Freight even improves on from a just quality of life standpoint using these, in my opinion. The forward reversed post pushes in a bit too easy on the backside of the Snap-on, where you have to make sure you don't hold your hand there, as it can nudge it into an accidental like neutral or low power mode. Did that once or twice. And the Snap-on has, in high, almost no trigger control, which is odd to say about a Snap-on, especially Snap-on air tools. The Harbor Freight, by comparison, you can nudge it along for threading things down and essentially modulate 4, 5, 6 different throttle zones just using the trigger. Few guys using these are adjusting the power switch in my experience, so being able to use the trigger for a heavy tool like this when you're lugging around is a big benefit. Of course, our sample size is small on these as well. Let us know which 3/4 inch impacts you'd like to see us purchase in the future. And until then, we make episodes like these every Friday. Click below to subscribe. Check out our rankings and info there below to be considered for these free tools from time to time. Thanks for watching.